Hey there, and welcome to Room 57, where the mysterious, the bizarre, and the chilling come to life. Tonight, we dive into one of the most twisted and unsettling true crime stories in recent years. A story that's left people questioning not only the events that unfolded, but the very beliefs and motivations that drove them. This is the strange, unsettling, and mind-bending case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. Imagine this: to missing children, the unraveling of a seemingly perfect family, and a trail of destruction that leads to dark beliefs, deception, and a shocking revelation that no one saw coming. This is a case that goes beyond simple crime. It touches on fanaticism, manipulation, and the far-reaching consequences of blind faith. What happens when religious beliefs take on a life of their own, and when the lines between truth and delusion blur? What happens when those closest to you are convinced that they're following a higher calling, no matter the cost? In the summer of 2019, Tylee Ryan, a 16-year-old girl, and her 7-year-old brother J.J. Vallow went missing, vanishing without a trace. Their mother, Lori Vallow, who seemed to be living a normal life, acted as though nothing had changed. She traveled with her new husband, Chad Daybell, to Hawaii and continued life as if nothing had happened. Yet, the police, despite their initial efforts to make sense of the disappearance, were facing a wall of lies, contradictions, and stonewalling. What began as a simple missing persons investigation soon spiraled into something much darker. The family members' stories didn't add up, and what should have been a routine investigation turned into a labyrinth of religious fervor, false prophecies, and deadly beliefs. What the police would eventually uncover would send shockwaves through the community, through the nation, and all the way to the world stage. The bodies of the two missing children were found buried on Chad Daybell's property, and what seemed to be a case of parental negligence or perhaps a simple disappearance would soon evolve into something far more sinister. But what makes this case truly disturbing isn't just the gruesome discovery, it's the chilling motivations behind it. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were not just a couple of lost souls. They were people who had come to believe that the end of the world was near, and they were convinced that they had a mission to prepare for it. They thought they were chosen, that they were living on the edge of a cosmic prophecy. To them, it wasn't just a matter of belief, it was a matter of survival. The rules of life, death, and morality had all but been rewritten in their minds. And it was these radical beliefs that, ultimately, led to the deaths of Tylee and J.J. But how did it come to this? How did Lori, a mother, allow her children to be taken from this world? How did Chad, a man who claimed to be a religious leader, fall into such a web of deceit and delusion? The answers lie in the strange and often disturbing relationship between these two individuals, their shared beliefs, and the deadly actions they took in the name of their faith. It's a story that has captivated the public's attention for years, raising questions about religious extremism, mental manipulation, and the dangers of blind faith. At its heart, it's a tragedy of family torn apart by dangerous beliefs that had no regard for the lives of those who were caught in the crossfire. But it's also a story about the lengths people will go to when they believe they're fulfilling a higher purpose, even if that purpose requires the ultimate sacrifice. So, as we delve deeper into this dark and twisted case, we ask ourselves, how can the people, so convinced of their righteousness, turn their backs on the most fundamental duty of all, the protection of their children? How can the lines between good and evil become so blurred that they're erased completely? And what does it say about the power of belief when it's taken to its extreme? In tonight's episode, we'll examine the chilling details of the disappearance of Tylee and J.J., the investigation that followed, and the dark, twisted beliefs that led Lori and Chad to do the unthinkable. We'll explore the psychological manipulation at play, the role of religious extremism, and the impact of their actions on the community and the wider world. And we'll leave you with a sobering reminder: when it comes to faith, power, and control, sometimes the most dangerous thing is not what we believe, but how far we're willing to go to make those beliefs a reality. As always, Room 57 invites you to think critically, question everything, and remember that even the darkest mysteries can reveal shocking truths. Part 1: The religious extremism and the cult-like beliefs. To understand the horrific events that unfolded in the case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, we must first explore the bizarre, disturbing belief system that shaped their lives and ultimately led to the tragic deaths of Lori's children, Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow. At the core of this case is a twisted version of religious extremism, one that moved far beyond traditional belief and ventured into dangerous, apocalyptic ideologies. What makes this story even more chilling is how seemingly ordinary people, one a mother and the other a self-proclaimed prophet, could be driven to commit unthinkable acts of violence in the name of their faith. Lori Vallow, a mother of 3, was no stranger to personal tragedy. She had already been through 2 divorces before meeting Chad Daybell. At the time, she was in the midst of yet another complicated chapter in her life, searching for stability and perhaps, most importantly, meaning in her Chad Daybell, a man who would come to shape her fate in the most terrifying of ways. Chad Daybell was not your average religious figure. Before becoming widely known for his involvement in the deaths of Tylee and J.J., Chad was a self-published author who wrote about the end of the world, or what he referred to as the end times. He had a particular vision of what would happen, one that merged Mormon beliefs with elements of apocalyptic prophecy, reincarnation, and a twisted sense of divine mission. He wasn't just writing for the sake of sharing his thoughts, he was building a following, a small group of people who would take his predictions seriously. What set Chad apart from other self-styled prophets was the intensity and certainty with which he shared his beliefs. He was convinced that a great cleansing would soon take place, that the world was nearing its final days. In his eyes, there was a specific group of people chosen to survive the coming storm, while others, those who were deemed dark or evil, would not. He believed that the faithful, those who followed him, would be the ones to help usher in a new age of perfect world after the purification. To prepare for this moment, he taught that some people had to be removed from the earth. This is where Lori Vallow comes into the picture. Like Chad, Lori was a Mormon by faith, but it was her vulnerability and desire for belonging that made her an easy target. For Chad's twisted teachings, Lori was searching for something greater, a purpose beyond the challenges of her own life. At first, it was probably a form of comfort, but as her relationship with Chad grew, so did her belief in his prophecies. Chad and Lori's relationship wasn't just one of romantic love, it was based on something much more dangerous, a shared belief that they were destined for a higher purpose. Lori quickly became enamored with Chad's apocalyptic vision, and she began to believe, as he did, that the end of the world was imminent. But more than just believing in an impending apocalypse, Lori began to believe that her role, her very existence, was tied to this future, a future in which only a select few would survive, and she was ready to play her part in bringing this new world to life. But Lori's children, Tylee and J.J., soon became obstacles in her mind. In Chad's apocalyptic worldview, those who didn't fit into his definition of righteous were seen as zombies or dark spirits, entities that needed to be removed for the world to be cleansed. Lori, who had once been a loving mother, now began to view her own children through the lens of this twisted belief. She saw them as burdens, people who were hindering her from fulfilling her higher purpose. With Chad, the once doting mother who had cared for her children, began to see them as a roadblock to her and Chad's prophetic mission. What began as an innocent shift in perspective soon became a dangerous and deadly ideology. Chad and Lori began to talk about preparing for the end times in a way that involved not just spiritual preparation, but physical action. In their minds, the rules of morality, family, and even life and death were no longer the same. They believed that the world's fate had already been sealed, and all they had to do was play their part in helping God fulfill it. For them, this wasn't just a belief, it was a calling. They saw themselves as the chosen ones who had been entrusted with the power to make tough decisions in order to bring about this new world. And so, they made the chilling decision to remove anyone who they thought stood in their way. The couple's religious extremism took on a life of its own, transforming their relationship into something almost cult-like. They both believed in the same vision, that only a few would survive the apocalypse, and they were among the chosen. The couple's radical beliefs were no longer about hope or faith, they became about control, manipulation, and death. Their actions, fueled by these dangerous ideas, started to align with their beliefs. This dark vision that Chad Daybell had crafted for Lori had now become her reality, and it was leading her down a path of destruction. Lori and Chad's delusions reached a point where they could no longer see the children as innocent victims. They saw them as obstacles, as pawns in a larger, cosmic chess game. And that's when the unthinkable happened. In the name of their faith and the prophecies they believed in, Lori and Chad decided to take the lives of Tylee and J.J. But the thing about beliefs like these is that they often blind people to the reality around them. As their apocalyptic fantasies took hold, they became increasingly detached from reality, willing to go to extreme lengths to achieve their delusional vision. Lori and Chad's beliefs weren't grounded in any kind of moral or spiritual clarity. They were fueled by self-serving, destructive ideas, and those ideas drove them to commit unspeakable acts. In the next part of this series, we will explore the eerie details of how Lori and Chad carried out their plan, how the investigation unfolded, and how the world learned of the disturbing actions of two people who had fallen into the grips of dangerous, fanatical thinking. But for now, it's enough to understand that this isn't just a case about murder, it's a case about the power of belief and how dangerous it can be when taken to its extreme. This part of the story delves deeply into the core of the case, explaining how Lori and Chad's religious extremism, influenced by apocalyptic beliefs, led them to manipulate their own minds and ultimately destroy their family. It sets up the chilling reality of how their delusional convictions led to such devastating consequences, preparing the audience for the next steps in the investigation and the horrifying discovery that would follow. Part 2, The Disappearance, and chilling revelations as we delve deeper into the mystery surrounding the case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. It becomes clear that the line between delusion and reality was never more blurred than when Lori's two children, Tylee and J.J., mysteriously vanished. What began as an investigation into the disappearance of two innocent children would soon unravel into a web of lies, manipulation, and a deeply disturbing truth that no one could have anticipated. The story of Tylee and J.J.'s disappearance began in the fall of 2019. Tylee, a 16-year-old girl, and her younger brother, J.J. Vallow, were last seen on September 8, 2019. This date would mark the last known time anyone outside of Lori and Chad saw the two children alive. At first, there was little indication that anything was wrong. Lori, a mother who had always been in contact with her friends and family, suddenly became distant. She stopped communicating with her close circle, and when people began to ask about Tylee and J.J., Lori gave vague, non-committal answers. She insisted that the kids were fine, that they were just with friends, or that they were somewhere far away. However, when family members began to grow more concerned, especially given that Lori's previous history as a mother was one of active involvement in her children's lives, questions began to pile up. It wasn't long before police became involved in the case. Investigators quickly discovered that Lori had lied about the children's whereabouts, and there were no concrete leads on where they might be. The lies escalated as Lori, along with Chad, continued to mislead the authorities and claimed they knew nothing about the children's sudden disappearance. But as the investigation moved forward, what was uncovered next was nothing short of a nightmare. The more police looked into the situation, the more inconsistencies they found in Lori's statements, and they soon began to suspect that Lori knew more than she was letting on. The situation took an even darker turn when Lori and Chad refused to cooperate with authorities and then disappeared to Hawaii in the middle of the investigation. It was clear that something sinister was unfolding, and the true nature of the case was far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't until late November 2019, 2 months after Tylee and J.J. were last seen, that Lori was arrested in Hawaii, but not before a series of shocking discoveries began to unfold. Investigators had now pieced together a disturbing timeline. The lies and deception surrounding the children's disappearance had led to a grim conclusion. But the biggest revelation came when the authorities searched Chad Daybell's property in Idaho, where the children had once lived. In June 2020, investigators made the discovery that would send shockwaves across the nation. The bodies of Tylee and J.J. were found buried in a shallow grave on Chad Daybell's property. For months, the case had been clouded with uncertainty, and what should have been a simple missing persons investigation turned into a gruesome discovery. Tylee's remains were found dismembered and burned, a chilling detail that raised more questions about how her life had ended. J.J., a 7-year-old boy with autism, was found in a plastic bag, his body wrapped in blankets. He had been shot in the head. The discovery was a horrific culmination of an investigation that had been filled with dead ends, lies, and denials. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell's involvement in the children's deaths was now undeniable, but the question remained, why? Why would a mother, driven by love for her children, participate in such a horrific act? How did the seemingly ordinary people fall so deep into delusion and belief that they thought murder was justified? To understand how Lori and Chad reached this point, we need to take a closer look at the twisted belief system that had taken hold of them. They didn't just view the children as obstacles to their apocalyptic vision. They had come to see them as dark spirits, souls who had to be removed in order to cleanse the world. The children's deaths were, in their minds, part of a larger divine mission to rid the world of evil and prepare for a new, pure era. The couple's extreme religious beliefs had led them to dehumanize the children, seeing them as impediments to their goal rather than innocent victims. It was this dangerous mix of religious extremism and blind faith that led to the tragic deaths of Tylee and J.J. Their actions weren't just those of a couple consumed by delusion. They were calculated, chilling decisions made in the name of a vision that had no regard for life or morality. In the aftermath of their arrest, the case continued to send shockwaves through the nation. What began as a disappearance investigation had transformed into one of the most disturbing true crime stories in recent history. Lori and Chad were charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and other crimes related to the deaths of Tylee and J.J., as well as the death of Chad's first wife, Tylee Daybell, whose death was also under scrutiny. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of parental negligence or a family tragedy had turned into a complex, multifaceted nightmare, raising questions about the power of belief, mental manipulation, and the devastating consequences of extreme religious ideologies. As the trial moved forward, the world watched in disbelief as the full extent of Lori and Chad's actions came to light. The case revealed not just the devastating loss of two innocent children, but the way in which manipulation, delusion, and apocalyptic thinking can lead people to commit unimaginable acts. The children's deaths, tragic as they were, have become a symbol of the danger that lies in blindly following belief systems that lack compassion, reason, and morality. But even as Lori and Chad face the consequences of their actions, the case continues to raise unsettling questions. How many people, throughout history, have been driven to commit heinous acts in the name of faith or belief in a higher calling? What does it say about the power of influence and how far people are willing to go when they believe they're doing something that is right? The story of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell is not just a tragic tale of murder, it is a cautionary one, warning us about the dangers of extremism and the devastating impact that blind faith can have on innocent lives. This second part of the story delves into the disturbing discovery of Tylee and J.J's bodies, explaining the chilling revelations surrounding their deaths and the manipulative beliefs that led to their murders. It explores the deeper psychological and religious motivations behind the actions of Lori and Chad, offering insight into the extreme nature of their beliefs and how they led them down a dark path. Part 3. The chilling discovery and the unraveling of the truth. As the investigation into the disappearance of Tylee and J.J. continued, it soon became clear that the truth was far darker than anyone could have anticipated. What had initially seemed like a case of missing children turned into one of the most harrowing true crime stories in recent memory, as investigators uncovered a disturbing series of events that led to the tragic deaths of Lori Vallow's children. The discovery of their bodies was just the beginning of a chilling unraveling of deception, religious extremism, and manipulation that would shock the nation. The shocking discovery in June 2020, the investigation took a grim turn when authorities began to search the property of Chad Daybell, located in rural Idaho. By then, Lori Vallow had been arrested and extradited to Idaho, but the whereabouts of her children remained a mystery. The search of Chad's property, a seemingly ordinary piece of land, would uncover the horrifying reality of what had happened to Tylee and J.J. What the investigators found on June 9th was nothing short of devastating. Tylee's remains were found dismembered and burned, buried in a shallow grave near a pond on Chad Daybell's property. J.J. Vallow's body was found in a different location, wrapped in plastic and blankets, his small body showing signs of being shot in the head. The two children, who had been so full of life, were now reduced to grim evidence of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation, confirming what many had feared. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were responsible for the deaths of Tylee and J.J., but the questions didn't end there. How did it come to this? How could a mother, a woman who had once been so caring and devoted to her children, be capable of such unspeakable acts? The role of religion and delusion to understand how Lori and Chad reached such a horrifying conclusion. We must return to the beliefs that had taken hold of them both. As we explored in Part 1, Chad Daybell was a man consumed by apocalyptic prophecies and the idea that the world was on the brink of collapse. His books and teachings were steeped in the belief that a purging was coming, and only a select few would survive the coming storm. To prepare for this moment, Chad had convinced Lori that she and her children were part of a divine plan, one that required sacrifice and purification. Lori, under Chad's influence, had adopted these beliefs as her own. The idea of dark spirits and zombies, people who were seen as obstacles to the coming of a new, perfect world, became central to their view of reality. In this warped worldview, the deaths of Tylee and J.J. were not seen as tragic losses. They were seen as necessary steps toward fulfilling their prophecy. Lori and Chad both believed that the children, who they viewed as dark, had to be removed in order for them to move forward with their apocalyptic mission. In their minds, they were not murderers, they were agents of a higher power, executing what they believed to be a divine plan. This chilling justification for their actions, rooted in religious delusion and fanaticism, made it easier for them to dehumanize the children and carry out their deaths with little remorse. Lori's manipulation and the impact of their beliefs. Lori's role in the deaths of her children cannot be overstated. She was not a passive follower, she was an active participant in this deadly narrative. As a mother, Lori had always been protective and loving toward her children, but as she became more enmeshed in Chad's belief system, she began to view her role as a mother through the lens of this warped theology. Lori came to believe that her children were holding her back from fulfilling her destiny, as she allowed Chad to manipulate her into seeing them as burdens. This manipulation is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Chad's ability to influence Lori and convince her to abandon her own children, to allow them to be murdered in cold blood, speaks to the insidious nature of the beliefs they both held. Lori's maternal instincts were overridden by the belief that she was part of a divine mission, one that required her to make the ultimate sacrifice. Lori and Chad's relationship was also built on this shared belief. The connection wasn't just romantic, it was rooted in their shared delusion, a belief that they were chosen by God to usher in a new era. Their shared vision of the end of the world became the glue that held their relationship together. And as they grew closer, the consequences of their beliefs became more dire. The psychological manipulation behind the murder Chad and Lori's belief system was more than just an odd religious ideology. It was a tool for control and manipulation. Lori, a woman with a complex personal history, was vulnerable to Chad's teachings. She had experienced divorces and had faced financial and personal struggles. When she met Chad, she was searching for meaning, for something greater than herself. Chad, with his promises of spiritual salvation and the opportunity to fulfill a higher calling, offered her the perfect escape from her troubles. Chad's influence over Lori was undeniable. He preyed on her vulnerabilities, manipulating her into seeing the world through his eyes. By the time of the children's deaths, Lori had completely adopted Chad's worldview, and she saw herself as a willing participant in a larger cosmic mission. Her role as a mother became secondary to the belief that she was chosen for something greater. The psychology behind their actions is chilling. They both believed that the end of the world was near, and that only a select few, those who followed Chad's teachings, would be spared in their minds. The children's deaths were not an act of murder, they were an act of spiritual purification, a necessary step toward a new world order. This delusion of grandeur and divine mission gave them the conviction to carry out the unimaginable, to take the lives of those who should have been most protected, their own children. The aftermath and the devastation left behind the aftermath of the discovery was a wake-up call for the entire community. Lori and Chad were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and other related offenses. The shocking nature of their crime left many struggling to understand how the people could become so consumed by belief that they would take the lives of innocent children in the name of an apocalyptic vision. The case continues to captivate the public, and as the trial progresses, more and more disturbing details about the couple's lives and beliefs continue to emerge. Lori and Chad's story is one of manipulation, delusion, and the destructive power of fanaticism. It is a stark reminder of how dangerous it can be when someone is consumed by extreme beliefs and is willing to sacrifice everything, even the lives of their children, in the name of a higher calling. As we reflect on the tragic deaths of Tylee and J.J., we are left with one undeniable truth. This is a case that goes beyond the crime itself. It's a story about the devastating consequences of unchecked religious extremism and the dangers of allowing belief to cloud one's judgment. The lives of two innocent children were stolen, and the world is left to pick up the pieces of a shattered family. This part of the story explores the horrifying revelation of Tylee and J.J.'s bodies and dives deeper into the psychological and religious motivations behind their deaths. It emphasizes the role that manipulation, delusion, and religious extremism played in leading Lori and Chad to their tragic decisions. The chilling nature of their beliefs and the dehumanization of their own children is made clear, setting the stage for the ongoing investigation and legal proceedings that would follow. Part 4. The investigation and trial, seeking justice for Tylee and J.J. The discovery of Tylee and J.J.'s bodies on Chad Daybell's property marked a pivotal moment in the investigation, but it was far from the end of the story. What had started as a missing persons case had quickly turned into a complex and tragic journey through deception, manipulation, and murder. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, once just ordinary figures in a small-town community, were now facing the consequences of their extreme beliefs and horrific actions. The path to justice would prove to be as complicated as the crime itself. The aftermath of the discovery: when the bodies of Tylee and J.J. were found, the world was left reeling. The public had followed the investigation from the start, hoping for the safe return of the children, but now they were confronted with the harsh reality: these children were never coming back. As the details of their deaths became clearer, investigators were forced to confront the chilling truth that Lori and Chad had orchestrated their murders based on a deeply distorted belief system. In the aftermath, Lori Vallow was arrested in February 2020 after months of evading law enforcement. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the destruction of evidence. Her arrest was a pivotal moment in the case, but it was just the beginning. Lori's cold demeanor throughout the investigation and her refusal to cooperate with authorities only deepened the mystery and the public's anger. Chad Daybell, who was also arrested shortly after Lori, faced similar charges, including 2 counts of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. But as the case progressed, it became clear that this wasn't just about the tragic deaths, it was about the power of belief and how it can drive people to commit acts of unspeakable violence. The investigation would uncover more than just the fate of Tylee and J.J. It would reveal a series of disturbing facts about Lori and Chad's involvement in other suspicious deaths and their chilling manipulation of those around them. Chad Daybell's role in the murder of his first wifeys. The investigation into Tylee and J.J.'s deaths continued. It became evident that Chad Daybell's role in the story was far more sinister than initially thought. The death of Chad's first wife, Tylee Daybell, had originally been treated as a natural death. She had passed away suddenly in October 2019, just weeks before the disappearance of Tylee and J.J. At the time, there was no clear cause of death, and many believed it was due to natural causes. But as law enforcement dug deeper into Chad and Lori's actions, they began to question whether Tammy's death had been a premeditated act. Tammy's death was soon reclassified as suspicious, and it was revealed that Chad had quickly remarried Lori just weeks after Tammy's passing. This rapid change raised red flags for investigators, who began to suspect that Tammy's death might not have been as innocent as it first appeared. In June 2020, after further investigation and autopsy results, it was determined that Tammy had likely died from asphyxiation. The circumstances surrounding her death became a focal point in the investigation, adding even more layers of complexity to the case. Chad Daybell, who had initially presented himself as a grieving widower, was now under intense scrutiny. It became clear that his role in Tammy's death and his subsequent involvement in Tylee and J.J.'s murders was central to the unfolding investigation. Tammy Daybell's death was, at the very least, part of the larger web of deception that had been spun by Lori and Chad. The investigation's dark turn from family tragedy to religious delusion as investigators pieced together the details of Lori and Chad's relationship and their shared belief system. The case began to take on an even darker tone. The couple's apocalyptic ideology was not just a background detail, it was the driving force behind the entire tragedy. Lori and Chad's shared belief in the end of the world and their conviction that they were chosen to play key roles in this spiritual cleansing had fueled their actions from the beginning. They had manipulated those around them, including family members and friends, into supporting their delusional vision. This belief system, which had led them to view their own children as dark spirits or zombies, was a form of extreme religious extremism. Lori and Chad truly believed that they were carrying out a higher calling by removing those who stood in the way of their apocalyptic vision. This manipulation was not just about convincing others, they had also convinced themselves, and as disturbing as it was, it became clear that they were willing to go to any lengths, including murder, to fulfill what they believed to be their divine purpose. In the months that followed, the investigation unearthed shocking details about the people Lori and Chad had deceived. Close family members of Lori had been manipulated into supporting the couple's beliefs, and some had even been involved in aiding their evasion of law enforcement. For example, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who was also connected to the case, had a disturbing history that included the shooting death of her ex-husband, Charles Vallow. His involvement in the family's tragic narrative painted a grim picture of how deep the deception ran. The trial and legal proceedings as Lori and Chad prepared for trial, the world watched with bated breath. The case had become a national sensation, with the public closely following every detail of the investigation and legal proceedings. The charges against Lori and Chad were serious, and the evidence was overwhelming. Lori was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and Chad faced similar charges for his role in the deaths of Tylee and J.J. But beyond the legal aspects of the case, the trial would also serve as a public reckoning for the twisted beliefs that had led to these horrific crimes. As more details emerged about the couple's ideology, the prosecution worked to demonstrate the dangerous power of religious extremism and the way it had warped Lori and Chad's sense of morality. The prosecution's goal was not just to bring justice for Tylee and J.J., but to highlight the devastating impact that extreme belief systems can have on vulnerable individuals. The defense, on the other hand, focused on discrediting the prosecution's narrative, attempting to argue that Lori and Chad's actions were the result of mental illness or some other mitigating factor. But the overwhelming evidence, including testimony from family members and law enforcement, painted a clear picture of a deliberate, calculated plan driven by a deeply disturbing belief system. The broader implications of the causes the trial of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell continued. The case sparked widespread discussions about the dangers of religious extremism, manipulation, and the lengths to which some individuals will go to pursue their delusions. The deaths of Tylee and J.J. were tragic, but they were also a warning about the devastating consequences of unchecked belief and the power of manipulation. In the end, this case serves as a chilling reminder that when belief is taken to its extreme, it can destroy lives, especially the lives of those who are most vulnerable. Tylee and J.J. were victims of a dangerous, delusional ideology, and their deaths have become a symbol of the devastating impact of fanaticism. Lori and Chad may face justice in the courtroom, but the true cost of their actions will be felt far beyond the confines of their trial. This part of the story focuses on the investigation and trial of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, delving into the legal proceedings, the broader implications of their extreme beliefs, and the role that manipulation and delusion played in their actions. The case has become not only a tragic family story, but a cautionary tale about the dangers of religious extremism and the consequences of blind faith. Part 5. The final reckoning and the legacy of the case as the trial of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell unfolds. The full extent of the tragedy begins to sink in. The court proceedings have become more than just a search for justice for Tylee and J.J. They have become a public reckoning with the dangers of extremism, manipulation, and unchecked belief. Lori and Chad's case has not only shocked the nation, but has forced society to confront a harsh reality. When belief becomes detached from reason, the consequences can be catastrophic. The trial's emotional toll. The trial of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell has been a painful process. For the families of the victims, the legal system, and the public at large, the testimonies in court, the evidence presented, and the chilling details about how these individuals could justify such horrific acts of violence have left many in a state of disbelief. The victims, Tylee and J.J., were innocent children whose lives were stolen because of the delusions held by their own mother and her partner. For those who knew Lori and Chad before their beliefs took over their lives, the trial is an emotional and difficult process. Family members, friends, and the broader community have had to grapple with the realization that the people they once trusted could commit such heinous acts. It's not just the murder of 2 children that is at the heart of this tragedy, but the emotional manipulation and the distortion of reality that led to these deaths. The full truth, as it comes to light in the trial, is a painful reminder of how easily a person can fall victim to dangerous ideologies when they are vulnerable or searching for meaning. The court's verdict, justice for Tylee and J.J. as the case moves toward its final stages, all eyes are on the court. The evidence is clear, and the story behind the crimes is deeply unsettling. As Lori and Chad face the consequences of their actions, many are wondering whether justice will truly be served. Will the legal system deliver the accountability that Tylee and J.J. deserve? Will the public learn the full truth behind the couple's warped beliefs and actions? The court's verdict is expected to be a defining moment in this case. For many, it will be a sign that justice can still prevail, even in the face of such unimaginable evil. But for the families of Tylee and J.J., no verdict can bring back the children they lost. The wounds will never fully heal, and the scars left by this tragedy will continue to affect them for the rest of their lives. The lasting legacy of this case extends far beyond the courtroom. The story of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked belief and religious extremism. It's a chilling reminder of how easily people can become manipulated and driven to commit horrific acts in the name of a higher purpose. But more than that, it's a reminder of the importance of questioning what we believe, of critically examining the ideologies that shape our lives, and of being aware of the influence others can have over us. Tylee and J.J. will forever be remembered as innocent victims of a world gone wrong. Their deaths were not just the result of personal failure or neglect. They were the result of dangerous, delusional thinking. Their lives, though tragically cut short, serve as a powerful reminder of the need to protect our most vulnerable, our children, from the destructive power of belief gone astray. As we reflect on the case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, we are reminded that justice is not just about punishing those who commit wrongs. It's also about understanding the deeper causes of harm and working to prevent it from happening again. We must continue to ask difficult questions, challenge dangerous ideologies, and stand up for those who cannot protect themselves. A call to action. As we wrap up this deeply troubling case, we encourage you to think critically about the dangers of extremism and blind faith. Educate yourself and those around you about the signs of manipulation and coercion, and always be vigilant in protecting those who may be vulnerable to harmful ideologies. If you or someone you know is in a situation where they feel controlled or manipulated, seek help. There is no shame in reaching out for support. If this case has sparked thoughts and questions for you, we invite you to leave a comment below. What are your thoughts on the role of belief and manipulation in this case? How can society better protect people from falling into these types of extreme ideologies? And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Room 57 for more content on real-life mysteries and true crime stories. Your support helps us continue to bring you the stories that matter and spark the important conversations that we all need to have. Thank you for joining us tonight, and as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop seeking the truth.